The work that we do every day actually requires us to get on Chronicling America, and we use that system frequently. About 10 or 15 years ago, we were constantly coming into the state archives to do this kind of work on microfilm, which was very time-consuming, as you can imagine, and was very costly for our clients. And so now that we can go into the computer from our offices and do searches from the website, we can get the kind of records that used to take us hours and hours and hours to get access to. So being able to search across many different newspapers, get information that dates back to the 1820s about Idaho and about other places across the country has been incredibly valuable for us in terms of making our research more efficient, but also in terms of being more wide and broad than it used to be, because we can make so much better use of our time than we used to be able to do when we had to do all that on microfilm. So it's been very valuable, and we're very grateful for the grant. My firm gets hired frequently by companies like Idaho Power, by Simplot, by water users across southern Idaho. And oftentimes we get hired because there's a modern issue, a water rights dispute, something related to federal regulation compliance that requires the company or the client, whatever it might be, the water user, to understand how this issue came up over time. So Idaho, of course, our history goes back 150 plus years, and of course much longer than that when you're dealing with issues relating to the Native Americans. But when it comes to modern issues, when we are dealing with regulatory compliance, we need to understand, and they need to understand, their history and how they got to the place that they are. And so by using the state archives, both paper collections as well as the materials that have been digitized, we're able to help those clients get to a place today where they can understand their history and work with the federal government or the state government with regard to compliance for environmental regulations or other kinds of regulations that they're dealing with. If you're dealing with rural communities, a lot of their materials are held in their rural communities, and so for researchers, traveling to those places can be expensive, and it can hinder the kind of research that we like to do. So when you talk about digitization and making those materials available on computers, searchable, it obviously provides a much broader access to those materials and allows many more people to do research on rural communities that more or less define how the American West developed. So being on that board has allowed me to understand how federal money helps little communities, again, digitize their materials and make them more widely available. So history has, over time, been really focused on more populated areas, and that's only because, again, the access to that material is much easier to come by. And so through the State Historic Records Advisory Board, what I've begun to see is that a lot of those small communities across Idaho in particular, but this is true across the entire United States, those small communities are able, with money from the federal government, to make those kinds of records more available widely. And so as such, and consequently, what's happened with the history field and what's happened academically is that a lot more academics and a lot more researchers from the academic community are able to widen their research so that we have a really much more nuanced and better understanding of how, in our case, the American West developed, because we look at these small communities instead of focusing our research on big places like Boise or Seattle or Portland or what have you. Through those grants, we can really understand better those smaller places that had a really important role in the development of the American West, and in our case, in the development of Idaho.